Welcome back to Fireplace Conversations. This evening, I'm Venture Klute, the Executive Director of Namibia Institute of Corporate Governance. And here with me tonight, just gentlemen. I guess I'm always thrown with gentlemen. In front of me, Mr. Steve Galloway. He has 40 years of working experience in exploration, mining, government, investments, corporate and project financing, banking, strategic management, and he has served on boards of several financial and mining companies. Steve retired from banking in early 2017, and he still serves on governing bodies of various banking, ICT, tourism, environmental, community and governance organizations, and on selected policy committees. That's a mouthful. And then I have Rodney Hoaeb. He's from Ocho. And he formerly served at the Namibia Trade Forum as a trade and investment researcher and country representative for global diamond brokerage company Ihenig, did I say it correctly, and company. He serves as the non-executive director for KGK Diamonds Namibia and is a spokesperson of the Namibia Diamond Manufacturing Association. Rodney holds few degrees, and as part of those accolades, he's currently busy with his master's in economics at UNISA, which is focusing on foreign exchange. I think also a good thing for tonight's topic. And he holds various professional certifications as well. Mr. Robin Sherbourne on my left holds a BA in physics from Magdalene College, Oxford, and an M Science in Economics from the London School of Economics in the UK. He was the first Overseas Development Institute Fellow to be placed in Namibia starting in 1991 as a researcher at the Namibia Economy Policy Research Unit and as an economic advisor in the National Planning Commission until 1995. And he then spent 2 years as the economic advisor in the UK's Department of the Environment before coming back to Namibia. And after writing a weekly column in the Namibian newspaper between 1998 and 2000 and introducing a course at the University of Namibia on the Namibian economy, he helped develop the research program of local stockbroking firm IJG Securities. And then in 2000, he established the Windhoek-based Institute for Public Policy Research, which is IPPR. And in 2004, the Current Affairs Monthly Inside Namibia magazine. He worked briefly as an advisor to the research department of the Bank of Namibia in 2008, before becoming the first group economist for Old Mutual, Nedbank, Netcapital in Namibia. And since 2007, he has been active participant in the ODI fellowship scheme, sitting on interview panel and so forth. And after 15 uninterrupted years in Namibia, he went back to the UK to take up a new post as head of ODI fellowship scheme in 2012. But currently, he's an economic freelance economist. And he's the author of this book, The Guide to Namibian Economy. I think this is the fifth, it's on the 5th edition right now, and I think everybody should get a copy of this one if you want to learn a bit more about the economy of Namibia. That was a mouthful on the accolades of my panelists, but that gives us a good overview of the expertise that we have around this table, discussing the very important topic of governance of natural resources in the context of triple bottom line accountability. And I did say that we'll have 3 series. We did people last week, and this week we are doing profit. Next week we end with planet. So to go right into it, and I'll start with my chairperson, Steve. So just to give a background, Namibia, mining is Namibia's leading economic sector, and it accounts for roughly 11% of Namibia's GDP, providing more than 50% foreign earnings. And this is what we got as reference from the New Era newspaper on the 12th of June this year, or last year instead. The economic sustainability implies a shift in focus from short-term profitability of individual corporations to long-term economic health of global, local, and corporate economies. So in view of that definition of economic sustainability, we want to focus on governance of natural resources, focusing mainly on the economy and the profit. How is Namibia benefiting from all these discoveries and all these emerging discoveries that are happening in Namibia? So as the custodian of natural resources on behalf of the state and the ultimate owners of resources, which are the Namibian people, what should the government do to see that there is fair distribution of benefits to owners and investors? It was a mouthful, but I hope you got it.
Thank you, Vincia. Yeah, as you said, I've been in the business of natural resources for, in fact, 42 years. And the rules stay the same. The new discoveries are very exciting, oil and gas, hydrogen, etc., but the rules are the same. The ownership of those resources vests with the state and, more importantly, with the people of Namibia, not with government, but with the state, and the ultimate owners are the people. Natural resources, most of them, certainly the mineral sector, oil and gas, etc., are not sustainable resources. By their very definition, they're depleting resources. So the custodians, the government of the time, have to look at the ownership benefits through generations. It's not their right to simply exploit the resources for current generation. They have to look at the resource rents, the economic rents that accrue to those resources, and try and spread them. And one of the ways that we've eventually decided to do that is through a sovereign wealth fund. I was in government at independence, set up a sovereign wealth fund at independence, because all of those resource rents that have been accruing to the very substantial mining sector should have been spread out. And of course, a new government has a challenge of balancing their budgets and all of that, but we should have thought a little longer term, and we should have set up a framework of tapping the resource rents, the economic rents, so that there is something to give the future generations benefit of those minerals. Example, a sovereign wealth fund. So now we've discovered, and mining, of course, has carried this economy up till now for 33 years and prior to independence. Now we've made major discoveries of oil and gas. We've known about gas, but the gas is coming into its own. And we've got hydrogen as an energy resource. And we really need to get that framework sorted very quickly. We at Independence set up a Petroleum Exploration and Production Act, even though we didn't have petroleum. It was really quite far-sighted of government to do that. And we got the best experts from the Commonwealth Secretariat. Robin came in as a youngster in 1991 and actually worked in my office in the Ministry of Mines. So we really had good expertise then to set up a proper framework. Now with these major discoveries, we need to redouble those efforts, and we need to set up a very strong framework that recognizes the massive impact that this could have, but puts in a framework that makes it intergenerational, so that we are not exploiting the resource just for today. And that's critical, that we bring all the best experts from the world, because these are world-class resources, and we bring the best advisors in now. We shouldn't think that we have the knowledge. We simply don't have the knowledge. So we've got to bring those people in to really get a fair framework so that future generations benefit from these discoveries.
Okay, so I'll go to Robin. Who should be at the forefront of making sure that we get this set up, this fund that Steve is talking about, if you do agree that that's what should happen? And what are your views about that fair distribution of wealth for the benefit of the owners and investors?
Yeah, look, nothing. I don't disagree with anything Steve has said. I think he's absolutely right. The basics remain the same. But I would add the following points. So first is the main challenge is for government. Steve's right. The resources belong to the Namibian people, but it's then government's responsibility to make sure these resources are optimally exploited. What does that mean? Well, everyone has a different view, and Steve talked about fairness. But basically, government has to balance a number of things always, because government is the one setting the rules for all this. So on the one hand, it has to ensure that there's sufficient incentive for the investors to come and put their billions into the resource to exploit it. If there's not sufficient incentive, no one's going to come along and exploit it. And that's true with all the resources we've had since independence. So it's got to keep that in mind. But on the other hand, it has to ensure, as guardian of the nation's resources, that the nation too gets a fair return. And balancing those two things is quite a difficult thing to do, partly because year on year, mineral prices change, people's perceptions change and things. And I think there's also a strong political element to this whole business that government has to balance, and that is it has to somehow demonstrate to the people of Namibia, the voters, that they are getting a fair deal. Now, all this is very complicated. I don't want to overcomplicate things at this stage, but clearly one of the main issues that government also has to deal with is, yes, it gets revenue from these sectors, it gets revenue from diamonds, it gets revenue from uranium and things, but what does it do with the revenue? The whole economic theory of natural resource exploitation is that you exploit a resource which is limited, it's finite. We're not talking about renewables at this stage. So we're exploiting our diamonds, but the more we mine, the less there are in the ground. Yeah? And we use that revenue that government gets to educate people, to improve their health, to improve the country's infrastructure, to make the country more productive, so it can then move on to other sectors and earn a living for the country in other ways. So it's no longer dependent on diamonds. Now, if government then ends up not investing those revenues properly, but say, for example, government just decides to bloat the civil service and blow all those revenues on employing as many civil servants as possible who are sitting there in government offices costing an awful lot of money every year, then we've got to ask ourselves, is that the best use of those revenues? Is that investing in the future of the country? If government decides to take those revenues and invest it in infrastructure that isn't productive, in white elephants essentially, is that the best use of those revenues? And I think that is the key challenge. So government has two challenges: to make sure that there's a balance between shareholder returns and what comes to the country, and then the challenge is to use what comes to the country in the best way possible in the long-term interests of the country. Now, in terms of sovereign wealth funds, that's fine. Steve says we should have created one at independence, and that's, that's a debate we can have. But the point is we didn't. And what we did, we blew all the resource rents on what we've spent it on: high government spending, high levels of public sector employment, infrastructure that's highly questionable, an education system that isn't really delivering, a health system that's falling apart. So we're spending that money on a lot of things that essentially are not productive. And that's the problem I have. So regardless of a sovereign wealth fund, when you have so many resources like Saudi Arabia or something that you don't know what to do with all the money that's coming, it's just so much, put it in a sovereign wealth fund for a rainy day. When you're not at that stage, and we haven't been at that stage for 30 years, invest that money wisely. And that, to me, is one of the key challenges that we haven't managed to address properly in the last 30 years.
Okay,
that's a very long answer, I'm afraid. But,
no, it's not it's a packed answer, and I hope that somebody takes note of, the answers that we're getting, because from this you can take away a lot that we can do as government, and probably whoever is involved in that structure. Rodney, what can you add to that? He's talking revenue, there's return on investment. There's so much that government can do. There's the fund. Yeah. What can you add to that debate?
Thank you, Venture. It is quite a kairos moment for Namibia.
Yeah.
But I would signify Namibia as to have a very matured economic structure. We are talking about the SACU Union being formed in 1905, and we have literally survived more than a millennium of mining, which I remember from the first mine being handed down, I believe in 1929, when the De Beers or the Namdeb mine was handed over to the South African government or the leadership of the administration at the time. The expectation in such a time would have been that significant amount of revenue would have lasted enough for us to be self-dependent in terms of mining. Yeah. Currently, we only account for 12% of GDP from mining sector, or from the primary sector, and that includes mining as well. And then we continue to also collect, say, in the range of I would say 12 billion comes specifically from the diamond sector, but which is dividends that is paid to government. Additionally, we can speak about the market capitalization of these companies, but within Namibia itself, according to the Chamber of Mines, they record that they have almost 40 billion in revenue that they make. So looking at the gap, and then merely the royalties are about $2 billion, there is still a huge gap that after so many years that we can speak about resource accumulation in Namibia. The cornerstone of such a debate is usually ownership.
Yeah.
And even just merely creating 16 to 17,000 number of jobs, but can we really speak about ownership? Because when we speak about ownership, it basically opens up a different debate. If you could have speak to owners, whether it's institutional owners, sovereign wealth fund, or ministerial government owners, and if the government had enough resources of enough revenue to keep within their own bank accounts that are coming from resources, the debate would have been different because they could have looked at avenues on how resource accumulation would have developed the country. Yet so much money is just going out to service the debt, and that is where the answer from Robin probably can surface. Do we make enough good fiscal allocation, reallocation for these funds? Or do we have to re-look at the whole formula as a mining country? Is it too late, or can we still open up the debate?
Is it too late?
I don't think so.
Okay, what do we need to do? Do we need, the fund is there, we need to reconsider how we structure the deals, I guess, and then policies. Do we need to speak about policies at all? Do we need to put in place some, legal institutional infrastructure that will carry all this that we're talking about today and put it in a place that, generations to come can refer back to that?
Yes. Venture, Namibia had quite a very interesting generation of mining generations. Yeah. We had resource mines that closed and never resurfaced and opened again. We have towns that became ghost towns and depleted and never resurfaced. Not a single light was turned on. Through that, what were the lessons learned? Yeah. So let me give a very strong example. We have the likes of Hoaeb town, which is sitting on a mine and which many people probably fear the collapse of it, not just in terms of the financial collapse, the physical collapse as well. So it is not just looking at the backup of the financial resources, it's looking at the backup of the empowerment that is done, the mitigation strategies. Yeah. When these towns are given, for example, I can make an example of a town, but I don't want to upset people, that was handed over for government directly from a mining company, yeah. And the development of this, further development of this town, basically the current nature or structure of it would be a testimony to how seriously we take mining development or the resource or allocation. Lack of seriousness or resource of it.
I think that's good. At the conference that we had, it was Fabian Shanika. He mentioned that strategic choices need to be made on how to exploit natural resources correctly from a mining perspective. And this is what you've just spoken about. The fiscal impact of the Namibia economy is significant, he said. And then for me, that evokes the question of the government stake versus government take. And Steve, I'd love you to come on that one. There's been a lot of debate in Parliament, social media, in the press lately about the implications of the offer and I asked this question last week as well, but from the economic perspective, there was an offer by Hyphen Hydrogen Energies to sell a 24% stake to Namibian government for the development of the country's first large-scale green hydrogen project. Now the government seeks help to buy these stakes. What is the sense in this? What can we make of this offer and also the government asking for funds to buy the stake?
Yeah, that's a very interesting one. And while I was in government, in fact, in 93, 3 years after independence, I was part of the negotiating team on the NAMDEB transaction. And I must say that has turned out to be an extremely good deal for government. Government negotiated a 50% stake, a free carry, if you like, with De Beers. So in addition to the resource rents that it was collecting on a very lucrative diamond business, we were able to negotiate a 50% stake. So the government take, as we call it, so all of the taxes, royalties, export duties, etc., plus dividends in that case, as a 50% shareholder, we thought we were negotiating a 75% government take, which was based on Botswana mainly. When one counts back 27 years or 8 years or whatever it was, in fact, that government take has been more than 75%. So that's the nature of that resource. That resource was such that even with the investor only getting 25% or less, they still stayed in the game, and they are still a very important investor in this country. That's a very specific case of a rich deposit. I jump now to hydrogen, and all I know about hydrogen is what I read in the press. But compared with that deal where we knew exactly, or we thought we knew exactly, we underestimated it a little bit, but we thought we knew exactly what the return on that investment was going to be, and we could quantify it, and hindsight has proven us conservative and right. In this case, my take is that the hydrogen dynamics are only going to be determined in about 3 years' time. There are going to be some pilots which guide us closer to the feasibility, but the Hyphen project, this massive project, is only going to be proven feasible or not in about 3 years' time. Right. So for government to go and make a decision now to pay for 24%, of what, at what price? If it's an option but on a base price, so that you sort of lock in an option price, maybe it makes sense. But I think it's premature to make a decision to go and risk a lot of investment or perhaps foregone opportunities now in committing to something which we read in the newspapers is going to be a 16 billion commitment. To the point we made earlier, if we could get 16 billion and put it into housing, health, education, etc., the impact, in my view, would be that much more important. So I'm quite skeptical of government at this very early stage saying we want to buy 24%. The other argument, the other argument, of course, and then asking to borrow the money. The other argument is that government should take 24% or 25 or whatever, because the resources belong to us, etc. That makes it even more complicated if we simply take, because it means that the investors' hurdle returns are just that much higher. So either way, I think it's premature to make those decisions now. And I'm very worried about the governance around those decisions. I really am worried about that.
Is it premature to take the 24% offer, or is it premature to even quantify the offer at this stage? So it's the quantification that I think is premature, and not necessarily the 24%, even though it obviously speaks to the 24%. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly it. There's no way that anybody can give a good valuation on what that 24% is worth at this stage. And that's why I say an option at a base price before prices increase possibly might be the way to go. But to commit is premature, and to borrow money, to me, is absolutely inappropriate. We are solving problems of climate issues in the global north. They should be paying for those problems. We should not be paying for it. So if it is such a compelling case that Namibia can become a big part of a solution for climate issues, it should be those countries that pay for the investment. And I don't think government should be taking on any financing commitments. And because if they go wrong, future generations will certainly condemn government for making those early decisions, in complete contrast with the NAMDEB decision, which was very well thought through and very beneficial.
And probably due diligence was done. I see you want to weigh in on that, Rodney.
Yes. The green hydrogen project, I'm not sure whether it's an evolving anthropological project or a simple chemistry project. What triggers my curiosity or skepticism is that Namibia has never dealt with such a multifaceted initiative before. What makes us think we have the confidence now to pursue such a business initiative? So the reason being that we are battling with bread and butter issues, and these are what people are saying. They're afraid of creating a very monolithic type of economic structure where focus is given too much to something. So now, in my little bit of exposure with green hydrogen and the studies that are available, is that first you require, because we have a show with people that need in-depth understanding on how this works. First, we need to split the atom between the water and create the hydrogen and split with the carbon. Then we need to use solar energy and harness enough wind energy and then use it to power up the electrolyzers, which is a very expensive technology. Some of it's still going into a very strong evolving stage because the prices are quite very high on electrolyzers. Then what we then do is use that electrolyzers to split these two, but we have to ensure that the water quality is also very good to create a good quality of hydrogen. Then we have to store the hydrogen that we have derived from this, and also the other carbon or chemicals that we split, to send them to other, for other purposes. Now, in such a scenario, I would already need the transport mechanism, which is your desalination plant that you have to put up at the ocean. We need that because we have a water issue. Namibia is a drought-stricken country. Yeah. So now here we only have pure water reserved for hydrogen. Secondly, the energy of the 3 gig of megawatts that they opt to produce, and 3 gigawatts in today's Namibia estimate of electricity is, we only create about 400 something megawatts, and 300 gigawatts is what green hydrogen requires, which means it is 6 times that amount. Then we have to wait and reserve this energy purely for green hydrogen. Then what happens next stage is that green hydrogen itself is having its own, overlaps in terms of transportation. It is not just something that you can just transport. You have to have a specialized vessels. And that technology also is within its nascent stages. There are countries that are looking at deliberating on how it should be done. Then you need the port infrastructure because you have to transport. You have an adequate port. Now, the current port capacity at Walvis Bay is, as you're well aware, is not beyond 700 or 800 TEUs per month. TEUs, I think that's an annual amount that we can do. So looking at that, the capacity is not that strong. Then you need the institutional, the governmental, the policy support of it. Now, coming back at the 24%, using the 24%, Hyphen as a company has got a very easy horizontal structure for negotiating their company prospects or the financial prospects that they have put up. I'm not sure at what price range. Because in the first place, if you are developing a product just looking for a cheap location to do it, that is already a wrong foot in the direction. Because I believe the current price is now you pay $4 for a green hydrogen per kilogram. And if that you're looking for a location that can give you $2 and so on, you're literally killing the expectations of that person because now you're pressuring them to commit to a market price. And prices volatility is very strong. And on the 24%, Hyphen can negotiate, coming back to that part, Hyphen can do it unanimously because all it requires is a board meeting. Namibia is governed by a government structure. And we have the investment promotion board. We have the cabinet. We have the taxpayers' money that we have to contribute to this. As well as the project that has different stages. They need money for feasibility. They need money for the construction phase. They need the CAPEX and OPEX expenditure money. And then they have a fund for operational costs. I believe in our discussions, it was 1 billion they need for construction and 3 billion in euros, which they need for the operations, which is quite within the range of 40 billion to 60 billion in these consecutive stages, which is funds that we cannot even use to settle our immediate debt. And the only thing that I can touch on is that Namibia is reaching its maturity period in 2025 for the Euro bonds that we took out. And in conclusion, if we are looking at green hydrogen to be the seed in as the new debt strategy for Namibia, then I think we are going terribly in the wrong direction.
And that actually brings me to that next thing that I wanted to talk about.
Let's just jump in.
I'm going to come to you. So you can jump onto that, latch onto what he said, and also answer the question generally about what would be the best way to get investments that will be sustainable for our economy without getting us indebted even further.
Yeah.
So please.
Okay. Well, my colleagues have raised some important points, but I think we have to recognise, government's damned if it does and damned if it doesn't.
Yeah.
If it doesn't invest in these projects, then they'll be criticised down the road. Why isn't Namibia part of this? Where's the ownership? You already hear it in Parliament. Of course, if green hydrogen, if Hyphen is a great commercial success and government has sat out and hasn't been part of it, it's going to be criticised for not reaping the profits further down the road. If it's a complete commercial flop, and I'm not saying it will be, but if it is, then government will be criticised for getting on board. The whole point about these businesses, mining businesses, and even green hydrogen now, is that these are risky businesses. And the fundamental question, Vince, is should government be in the business of investing in risky businesses? And my view generally is that it shouldn't, because it's dealing with taxpayers' money. It's got to behave responsibly. It's not like a private company where if everything goes belly up, then the shareholders take the consequences. No, it's all the Namibians, all the taxpayers who bear the consequences. So as a general rule, I would not recommend government to get involved. Now, I agree with Steve. Namdeb was a special case. Government didn't have to put any cash into that deal. Right. Government had to give certainty, a 25-year license or whatever it was at the time. De Beers put in all the cash. Their operation was already running. And I have to say, De Beers has done a fantastic job in supporting the global diamond market, without which we wouldn't have a business here at all, because they're essentially creating a lot of the feelings and things associated with diamonds, which is why people buy it, what is essentially a useless product. So they chose a good partner. It was a well-established business that had been going for, a century or more. So people knew what they were dealing with. It wasn't as risky as going into some of the other projects. We seem to have forgotten the Ongopolos and the Air Namibias and all the other projects that we put lots of money into, which have gone belly up. Yeah. And that's the thing viewers must also bear in mind when they see a B2 Gold making lots of money. They say, oh, these mining companies, they're coming here, they're making a fortune, and they're giving nothing back, Obviously, I'd have to look at the numbers to give judgment, but what they don't look at are all the failed companies, shareholders who put billions in. I mean, Lange Heinrich is a good example. They tried to create a world-class uranium mine, and then the uranium price dropped after Fukushima, and the shareholders are still waiting for some return on all their investment. So we must, like government, we must see things in a balanced way. Don't only look at the winners, look at all the losers as well. And we must ask ourselves, do we want government to have invested in businesses that potentially lose that amount of money? My recommendation would be not. My recommendation would be to tax and regulate the sector properly, get the revenue from it, let the private sector take the risk, and do good things with the revenue that you get. That's my general rule. There are exceptions.
Yeah. Does that take us back to that first conversation that we started with, basically, right? It takes us back to the Wealth Fund. It takes us back to all those considerations, the pros and cons and all of that. Do you think that has happened? Clearly not, like, what Steve has said, in this 24% stake, government stake issue. This has clearly not happened. So what now? We find ourselves having committed.
It's that clear, to be honest. I would say, a lot of us are not in the negotiating room, so we actually don't know.
Yeah.
And I would say, and this comes back to my original point, how do we know what we're getting from either government investments or private sector companies? We have no information, not even from our good friends at Namdeb, how much tax they're paying. Are they paying a fair amount? How much profits they make? We know nothing about this whole sector of our economy. The Chamber of Mines does a good job trying to bring some information to the public. But like the fishing industry, the diamond industry, the mining industry, all these industries we have in Namibia, nobody really knows what's going on because nothing is transparent and there's no public information about it.
I think that beckons me to ask you, Steve, actually you, because of ESG reporting and so on, is there a point in time that we should be considering ESG reporting? And I've just invited you to, a workshop that we're going to have with public entities sometime in September on ESG reporting. And maybe this is now the time to structure that governance around ESG reporting, even from government, isn't it?
I'll come to that. I just want to add on a little bit on what Robin said. Yeah. We don't know until we know. And with the Namdeb deal, of course, we knew a lot. On the hydrogen deal, I don't think we know enough. And there have been others that have been disasters, and there have been others that have sort of been in between. But I think the issue is that government must make up its mind from a policy point of view. Does it really want to become a risk taker? Robin argues they shouldn't. I argue the same, unless the risk has been really mitigated, like De Beers. The sort of parallel issue is that the role of government, and this comes to governance, we find ourselves in so many cases with government trying to be a player and a regulator. And this has been improved a little bit with the Ministry of Public Enterprises now, that's somewhat separate, because before you had a NAMCOR in the Ministry of Mines as a player and an advisor, if you like, if not a regulator. And I think we've got ourselves into a mess in a governance framework where the player, Epangelo for that matter, is also too close to the regulator. NAMCOR is the same. And I think that confused situation that government has found itself in has been very bad for governance. And if you look at all the public enterprises that are either operating in or regulating natural resources, they generally are conflicted. And that's a problem. So coming to your question of ESG, of course we must go to ESG. But even before we go to ESG, we must go to transparency.
Right.
We have been highlighted as one of the few countries, in Africa at least, that isn't part of the extractive industries transparency index. Now there are views on whether that's an effective index or not, etc. We can debate that. But it stands out. And now that we've discovered oil, gas, etc., it stands out even more that we apparently or allegedly are not opening ourselves up to this transparency. And that's the first thing we should do. Consider very seriously whether we join EITI or not. I don't know if they're effective or not, but it's that sort of organization that gives international credibility. The Fraser Institute, for example, the rating agency in the mining industry, is a very important indicator of governance in your country. ESG is going to take some time, but we should already start doing some of the elements that make sense for us. This ESG tidal wave that's going around the world is very much dominated by global climate metrics, and we must be careful of that. And I think in this hydrogen wave that we're in now, that's what's driving our actions there. It's the global E. We should be looking at E, local environment. We should be looking at S, very importantly. What are our social backlogs? The partners that we have in the global north don't understand our social situation and the backlogs we have. And we should be looking at our local governance context. So these sort of global ESG tidal waves that are coming at us, we must be very careful of them because they're being driven by different interests. But we should be implementing ESG definitely on our own terms, in our own frameworks.
So how can we do better with transparency? We said we don't know. We constantly saying we don't know, and we debating these very critical issues where government wants to take the 24% stake and still get some money from investors and so on. We don't know until we know, and we can only know when there's transparency. How can we enhance transparency? Is there any of you around the table who would like to talk to that?
Well, there's plenty you can do on transparency, and we don't need to belong to the EITI to enact what we think is appropriate, transparency and good governance. But at the moment, we can sit here and we can debate all night, Vincia, but none of us have any numbers. So, there was an ad in today's paper by B2 Gold showing their performance since 2015. I thought it was a very interesting article, but it was hard to say whether any of these numbers were audited. There was no mention of the profits they'd made. It was very difficult to come to an informed conclusion as to whether this investment was good for the country. I personally believe it has been, but I can't prove it because the information isn't really there to be able to do it. So you can come to me and say we're being taken for a ride by these foreign investors, and I can come to you and say no, we're not being. They're doing a great job, but no one really knows because there's no evidence on which to base anything, and that goes for for most of the mining companies, for Namdeb and fishing companies as well, extractive. Most of these businesses, you couldn't say whether whether the country was a net beneficiary from the investment.
What I would like to add on that is that government has the right to demand whatever reporting they want. I used to work in the Ministry of Mines, and when Robin walked into my office in 1991, he was one of the guys who was collating that stuff. And we would look at all the contracts, we would look at all of that. So government has the right. Government doesn't need a stake in the company to be able to get that information. As the regulator and the custodian, they have the right to have that information. But they often don't have that information, and sometimes they have it, but they don't know they have it. So you don't need an EITI to do that. But what I'm seeing now is that, and I'm not speaking for EITI, I don't know whether they're efficient or not. But what I am seeing is that global bodies like the ESG rankers and raters that are coming up now are starting to stop this sort of greenwashing, which has been prevalent. Under the SDG regime, greenwashing became very prevalent, where people just say, we do all these wonderful things, they're not audited, not quantified. And if ESG gets to the right place, those will be audited and quantified, and you'll have to account for all 6 capitals, not just the financial capital. Already there are cases of Shell, for example, being told to withdraw information, adverts, sustainability reports, which were termed greenwashing. It's gone beyond greenwashing, it's green fraud now. People are really misrepresenting their green commitments, and that's green fraud. So we'll get to a point pretty soon, and it should be a combination of government getting that information and exercising their regulatory role, and then international bodies, whichever they might be, that really become the custodians of integrated, honest reporting, because there has been a lot of misinformation and greenwashing, to be polite, but green fraud to be more factual.
And I think that information, that reporting, obviously, should come to the fore for the benefit of the taxpayers who are always asking these questions, because until you know the credible information, and you said honest reporting, until you know that, obviously the questions that are being asked around the table are being asked around the table. I'm asking myself this question, and maybe because I'm not an expert in natural resources, which all of you are, is government the only player in this, ensuring that the country benefits? Who are the other players? I'm thinking of banking institutions, how they can position themselves in a time like this. I mean, government is looking for money. How can they position themselves? And obviously not only for their benefit, but also for the people and for the country. Rodney?
Yes, that is a very nice or interesting question. I think I can draw also from the interesting conversations that are raised here in the room. Yeah. But then government is responsible for allocating the resources. And I think also on Robin's point, I also believe in some form of government intervention. I mean, government intervention and the length or the strength of it is a very age-old economic question in terms of how strongly government should intervene. But I believe in one thing. I believe that government should be involved up to a point where they establish strong institutions that can drive development in those respective sectors. And then they can take the seat back and just ensure that the regulatory environment is flourishing. So Steve also raised a very interesting point. Because the initiatives are green, or the future looks green, but the money is not always green. Yeah. Sometimes the money comes in a very black way. So we have to be very cautious about anything that we just take on. And I believe the government should also have the right institutions to check the portals on where your money flows from. They have to look at the capacity that is required, because these are the taxpayers that will hold government accountable to ensure that they have the right capacity and the skills, that they have the right allocation to solve inequality, and that they create the jobs itself. And these are the points on which governments get elected so that they meet the needs of the people. And government looks at itself, but I can throw in one specific illustration of a sector that has somehow derailed the ambitions or the involvement or eroded the trust of government in business sector. It is when they establish BEE sector or the NEP and how they've managed to do it. Because empowerment was initially done pre or post-independence. And when we did it, did we do it with the right motive of inclusivity? Did we think about solving inequality? Or did we think about empowering certain people that had privilege on access to information? And as Steve has said, transparency was very important. So if we have institutions that have access to information, businesses that are empowered and equipped to know the information, there wouldn't be need for government intervention, because businesses will identify it. Because we are transitioning towards a oil regime or an oil era, businesses now rely on government to equip them with the right access to information, access to training platforms, access to empowerment strategies, access to ownership concessions. And government should do this without expecting a quid pro quo approach of saying, I also want, I also need. And that is what we should develop in terms of meeting that transparency milestone.
I think it's a good point you raised, because it was sitting at the back of my mind thinking, how do we avoid corruption in a time like this? How can we really trust that the decisions that are being made, and they are made in boardrooms where no one else is privy to information? How do we avoid corrupt activities happening, that contracts are made in the interest of generations to come for the country and not for specific people to benefit? Quid pro quo, as you said it. It's probably difficult.
Yeah, but if you take the banks, for example, I mean, they all publish fairly detailed annual reports in this country. They're listed, FNB, Standard Bank, Bank Windhoek and stuff. There's an awful lot of information there. It's not difficult to oblige foreign investors, if it's foreign ones you're talking about, to just say you have to publish a detailed report about your Namibian operations. Right. That's not particularly difficult. If they're transfer pricing or up to all sorts of funny business, that may well then come out. Yeah. But seems if you want to buy the trust of the country you're investing in, you have to be open. If you're hiding things, obviously people are going to become suspicious, aren't they?
You asked this question, is it only government? What should others do?
Yeah.
And we were in a session with a leading bank the other day where they asked the question. They said, what should happen if a particular investor is doing bad stuff in the country? And our answer to them was, you should blow the whistle. If you know it's bad practice, you should blow the whistle. And I say the same to auditors. Auditors have a responsibility, apart from their materiality benchmarks. Qualitative materiality is just as important. If a company is behaving badly, unethically, auditors should blow the whistle and help government in that. In the particular case that was raised, it's very awkward, and this comes to the conflict issue that I mentioned earlier, where government, through one of its public entities, has taken a stake in a particular company, and they compromised. They cannot possibly be a fair regulator when one of the entities is owned 10% by them. That's that conflict. They must decide, are they a regulator or are they a market player? Apart from the economic considerations, the ethical considerations of being part of something that's not okay. But it's the whole society, all of society, banks, auditors, representative organizations, chambers of mines, chambers of commerce, should show when their members are not behaving properly. So it really is a collective responsibility to flush out bad practice.
You mentioned that owning a company and that 10% example that you just gave, and last week when we were talking about this specific topic, but on people, there was a sentiment that what is wrong with government establishing institutions? You spoke about institutions. Establishing a specific institution which would be a vehicle through which we would earn those specific returns, or for instance, the vehicle through which we will deal in the specific, say, hydrogen specific item. Anything wrong with that? If it's for the benefit of Namibia, it's particularly for that.
Not at all, and that's the Singapore model. Singapore's got an investment company that invests on behalf of government, and it invests in Singapore and abroad. But it's got investment professionals who make those decisions. They're never government employees or politicians making those decisions. And it's been a fantastic example. When the Ministry of Public Enterprises was moved into the Ministry of Finance, that was in fact announced that it would, in some point, set up a holding company. And I support that fully. But you've got to get away from those conflicts of being player and regulator, with a board of directors who have proper governance and proper expertise making those decisions without political intervention.
So if I didn't ask this question, then I think I would be remiss. The issue of beneficiation, it's been rife. Rodney, what is your view on that proposed establishment of the mineral beneficiation sector? How will the EU partnership and the mineral beneficiation strategy ensure value for the local economy? I think you also commented on this specific item in the newspaper recently. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mineral beneficiation I'm not sure if you speak in light of the oil sector, that is, the prospectus.
Yes, let's speak of that.
Yeah, or the lithium, nationalization or private. Yeah. Basically, if I look at the oil prospects, we're talking about the capacity of just on operational expenses up to 40% of just annual spending, according to my research of these companies. Yeah. And Namibia doesn't want to sit idle and look at all these money just going out of the country. That means that we should look at strengthening once again our value chains, looking at other alternative industries. Secondary industry, for example, is one beneficiary of oil industry or raw materials from the oil industry. You can look at manufacturing of plastic products, plastic chips, and the likes, which can, just not remove the focus from oil import or production, but also in creating an industrialized society and overcoming that resource or Dutch disease.
Okay. You want to add anything to that? No?
Well, we've been talking about beneficiation for 30 years. There's sections of my book. As an economist, I'd say where it makes commercial sense, do it. Right. The question is, where does it make commercial sense? A bit in the diamond industry. We've got a small diamond cutting and polishing industry, but it doesn't make sense to cut and polish all our diamonds, unfortunately, because most of them are far too small to make commercial sense to do that here. It might make sense in lithium, but just remember, beneficiation tends to be energy intensive, water intensive, capital intensive, skill intensive. So could well not create all those thousands of jobs we're looking to create, and could well, struggle. We're struggling at the moment with energy. Do we want to invite people in to do energy intensive activities when we're struggling ourselves to keep the lights on? That doesn't make sense. So that would have to be part of a strategy. We must say to the investors, come, we've got the water, we've got the energy, come and invest here to do your beneficiation. But if you haven't got that, you're not even on the starting blocks, to be honest.
Yeah.
And that's why I also made a comment in the press the other day that this blanket ban on what was called critical minerals, the intention is right. We want to add more value, we want to create jobs, we want to do all of that stuff here. But you can't simply go and say all critical minerals. Critical minerals are whatever you define them to be. Australia has 26 right now, 26 critical minerals. We threw manganese in there. I don't know where that came from. But simply to say all critical minerals now can't be exported in raw form. The sentiment is right, but you've got to go mineral by mineral and say, what are the dynamics of lithium? That's a very topical one now. Yes. And I fully agree. And we've been asking the minister to intervene for the last year. We should not be exporting lithium ore. It makes no sense whatsoever to export lithium ore. Yeah. So we should be setting up value chains in each mineral, and we must have the expertise to be able to say, in this mineral, you do the following. And that must be a licensing condition. It can't be a blanket ban across all critical minerals. We did the same in 2011, Robin will remember. We said strategic minerals will in future be allocated to Epangelo. Strategic minerals at the time was only uranium because of the sort of energy component and the sort of safety part of that. So the uranium prices, the uranium stocks, and I was chairman of Swakop Uranium then, stocks halved overnight. The value of the company halved overnight. And then government came out and said, no, we didn't really mean that. But, those blanket ad hoc policy pronouncements cause so much damage, and it takes you a while to get back. Nothing wrong with the motive, but the implementation must be done very differently.
We're unfortunately coming to the end of our conversations. I told you an hour goes by really fast, but I have this interesting question from the viewers. There's a specific question that's really interesting. Then it's about the banking institutions. And so the guy is asking, Mr. Jeff is asking, why do speakers have such confidence in the Namibian banking institutions? Are they also not corrupt? How did the fish rod guys manage to transfer such huge amount of money while Lelere is subjected to intensive question transferring 30,000, or I'm reading it verbatim. So the essence, I think, of the question is, should we trust banking institutions even when they are doing their audited reporting and so on, to be, probably custodians of these investments, or even the people who will be giving us the monies and so on. So anyone on that one?
Well, I don't want to put myself forward as someone who has complete faith in the Namibian banking system. I've criticised it regularly enough in the past. Look, corruption is everywhere in every country. You know, capitalism is inherently corrupt in many ways, and that's why you need good regulation. But I don't tend to condemn institutions or companies without any evidence. So I wouldn't say this bank is corrupt without any evidence. The question is, the more numbers, the more transparency you force on a particular sector or business, the more likely you are to pick up whether funny things are going on or not. Yeah, and the less we know about it, and believe me, I've studied our economy for 30 years and I still don't know how it operates. The less we know about it, the weaker position we're in to say, oh, this industry is corrupt or this business is corrupt or whatever.
Yeah.
And I would also say, I completely agree with Steve, it's all our responsibilities. This is our economy. We must care for it. We must tend it. It isn't just something to be taken from. It's something we all participate in, especially people who are sitting in nice, comfortable rooms like us having fireside chats. It's all our responsibilities. We can't blame someone else when things go wrong.
I think the viewer's question was spot on, and I think we answered it just before we came on, where we said banks, auditors, everybody must flush out bad practice. And I think Fishrot and a few others have made banks aware of that, and the Financial Intelligence Centre certainly is on the case of banks now. So it might be that banks and auditors and others were sort of turning a blind eye, and that's why I raised this issue of materiality, qualitative materiality, where something that's blatantly wrong must be flushed out by banks, by auditors, by the whole society. We must become whistleblowers.
To who?
Easily said.
Yes. Yes, please, Rodney.
I think corruption is purely bred by entitlement to power. And we want too much control and too much power, but we don't know how to use it in the absolute way. And I believe that the moment we all realize we are all equal, in the eyes of, not only in the eyes of God, but we are equal as Namibians, equally entitled to the resources in the country, and I believe we'll create a fair level of distribution of resources.
I think there was so much. The session was really packed, and I'm not an economist, but I could pick up a few things that I think critical, people in government should have heard this conversation, and hopefully they will get to hear this conversation, because there's so much that we can take and implement from just this conversation. And clearly, if I can sum it up, there's due diligence that needs to be done. We can't take decisions in a haste. First of all, we'll need to do a lot of digging and a lot of due diligence in order to come to decisions. And obviously, as we have said, these decisions are made in rooms where none of us are privy to or I have entered. But the importance of transparency, and not just transparency and reporting of information, but honest information that has come out, So these two things, I think the due diligence aspect and also the reporting aspect will probably be key in this era that Namibia finds itself. I want to ask you to give me 30 seconds of your final views on what we've been talking about and how government can really be a good custodian in the moment that we find ourselves. Steve.
Let me start, because I made some comments in the press about government making blanket decisions. I really think government's heart is in the right place, and they're trying to be the custodian. But I think they need to consult much more with informed groups, Chamber of Mines, Chamber of Commerce, etc., and really get inputs, trusted inputs from people on the ground who are doing the work. And then I think their very noble policy objectives will find implementation in really practical measures. So I think we've got to trust each other more, and we've got to consult more, and then we'll be on track.
Rodney.
Yes, I would say that we are confronted only with three options in the wake of globalization, and as Namibians, we are merely 2.5 million people. So we either conform to the current way of doing things, we either concede to the current way of doing things, or we evolve beyond the current way of doing things. And I believe that Namibia's strategy can be to evolve and transform itself to the next frontier of economic prosperity.
Well, I don't disagree with anything that's been said. I'll make a plea for more economics in decision making. I'm a great believer in analysis and numbers and doing some research and asking people who really know the business before you make any decision. That goes for a business, for an NGO, for a research organisation and for government. And it just seems to me, and I gave a long presentation on this last September, Vincia, we need more analytical economics in the decisions we're making. And that will take us away from just political decisions or decisions because it sounds like a nice thing to do or the right thing to do. We need to be a lot more hard-nosed about what we're doing. And I think that could be done. I mean, government's in a position to buy the best expertise in the world. If it wants to ban lithium exports, just, you know, bring in the world's #1 lithium expert for a couple of months, get him to look at the situation or her, and, you know, make a recommendation. There's no shortage of expertise out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
The problem is on the demand side. We're not demanding that expertise.
I like that. And I couldn't add to everything that has been said. I hope my people have captured all these last sentiments, and I know you'll see them tomorrow in our captions and in our quotes that we have started to give out to our public. You know, we have now started a little tradition where we quote all our speakers on the very important and key contributions they've made, and you've made quite key ones tonight. And I thank you for giving us your time and your expertise. Namibia needs more of you, and I hope they will ask for your services because you are needed for this very era that we found ourselves in. It was Namibia Institute of Corporate Governance with Fireplace Conversations. Thank you for joining us tonight with our viewers. Thank you so much. We'll see you next week. Fireplace Conversations, talking about the same thing but focusing on planet next time. Good night.